All right, guys, here's your discussion review from today. We're talking about the second seal and the Ezekiel 38 war. So, started off with reading to you guys a letter from a guy named Albert Pike. He lived back in the 1800s. He was a Confederate general. He was a Freemason leader. Not really a good character. You could kind of look at the history of Albert Pike. But he wrote a letter in dated August 15th, 1871, to a political leader in Italy by the name of Mazzini, um, believed to possibly be the leader of the Illuminati. The Illuminati exist. And what was interesting about the letter, and some claim maybe it's a hoax, but the letter's out there. What's interesting about the letter is that it is an outline um, on how to bring about the end of the world, really, how to bring the end of society, how to bring about a social cataclysm. What was interesting about the letter is the stuff that is in the letters have actually been happening over the last century. So here's the letter. I got it on a few slides here posted. It starts off with him talking about some world wars. It says the first world war must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia and making the country a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergences caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the British and the Germanic empires will be used to foment the war, and at the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and to weaken their religions. What's interesting is that this is actually exactly what happened in history. After World War I, which was between the British and Germany, the Germanic empires, a few years after, communism was born in 1922, about 4 years after World War I ended. And communists slowly started growing to power and started undermining the other governments that are in the world, and also even weakening religions within the communist regime, right, where government kind of becomes the religion and religions are slowly kind of phased out. So we saw kind of this stuff actually started happening, how Albert Pike wrote in this letter. It makes you wonder, I mean, was this a scripted thing? I mean, has history been scripted and we're kind of, under the plan of the Illuminati carrying out their plan here for us in society? But the letter continues, and that's just the First World War, but the Second World War, Albert Pike says in his letter, must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. Interesting. The war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. So sorry for the history lesson that I gave you guys today in discussion, but I think it was very important, especially with what's going on today, to understand the history of communism, Zionism, the state of Israel, fascism, all that stuff, Nazism, and what that was. So I know I gave you, you weren't expecting a 10 to 15 minute history lesson when you showed up today, but sometimes knowing history helps you understand what's happening today and what is coming in the future. So we talked about all that. I'm not going to go over it in the review today. Hopefully, you stayed awake through the little history lesson today and learned the difference between fascism and Zionism and Nazism, and the tie from Nazism to the occult that existed way before. Nazi was a political party and all that stuff, and the instituting of the sovereign state of Israel. I also gave a little history lesson on the land itself, how Israel was kicked out by the Romans a while ago, right? Around the years set between 70, 75 or so. And since then, the land was kind of barren. And then, the Islam nations kind of took it over. We talked about the Crusades a little bit, and, basically how Israel just came back into the land after World War II. And you can see why Palestine is kind of upset that they just came back when they've had the land for hundreds of years. Those Israel's lands before that. So that's the current contention going on in the world. It's been going on ever since Israel returned to the land. And it goes along with the prophecies of, Ezekiel 37 and getting into Ezekiel 38, which we talked about in the lesson. I'll continue with Albert Pike's letter. He said that during the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom. Or we talked about, democracy kind of being, tied into Christendom. Well, after World War II, communism then started spreading, right? Just Russia, China, Korea Peninsula, into Vietnam, and then we had what was called the Cold War, as I talked to you guys about today. So again, just interesting how this letter is like a playbook of what's happened over the last 100 years. In the letter, he said that this international spread of communism being strong enough to balance Christendom, which Christendom would then be restrained and held in check. Interesting. Communism did kind of slow the spread of the gospel a little bit, didn't stop it. You can't stop God's words from spreading. But it did kind of hold it in check a little bit, and it says until, according to Albert Pike's plan, this will be until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. All right. What is this final social cataclysm that they got outlined? Well, he has outlined a third world war in there. Now, obviously, this hasn't happened yet. We've seen World War I. We've seen World War II happen. Scarily, it happened exactly how this letter predicted, how this letter outlined. Again, I don't think this is a prophecy or a prediction per se. I think more, if anything, it's a script where the powers that be are kind of running a scripted show to bring about their agenda. Interesting. So what did he say about World War III? Well, it says the Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agents of the Illuminati. So you keep hearing about these agents of the Illuminati being basically embedded in all the parties and just kind of making this stuff come about. That's interesting too. The Third World War will be between political Zionists, so the sovereign state of Israel today, and the leaders of the Islamic world. Now, this is not far-fetched, right? It almost seems like we are at the brink of this happening right now. The Islamic leaders of the world, starting with Iran and the other nations, are banding together over the fight going on between Israel and Hamas. And you can totally see where this conflict that we're in right now has the potential, has World War III potential. It can happen. I hope not, right? I hope the conflict dies down and everything goes kind of back to a normal state. But there is the potential that this can really blow up into a third world war. It says the war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. So, we'll see. We'll see if this kind of plays out. Is this a hoax, or tell you what, if World War III kicks off and it plays out exactly how this letter has it outlined, then I think we could throw the hoax thing away and kind of see how this has all been scripted over the last 100 years and planned out. All right, the conclusion of the letter is the most alarming because it kind of outlines the goal of all these world wars and the whole plan. It says, meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists, which are basically people that just don't have any belief, just don't care about anything, no moral compass, I guess, and the atheists, which are totally against God. And we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, the origin of savagery and of the most bloody turmoil. Even they recognize that atheism is not a good, doesn't have a good outcome. Then everywhere the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity. So that's alarming. Whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. So here's the end state of all this. If this is a scripted Illuminati plan over the last century of 3 world wars to bring about a complete social cataclysm, the end state is, in order for the pure doctrine of Lucifer to be brought finally out into the public view. Now, we talked about how the Church of Lucifer, the Church of Satan, it is growing exponentially, especially recently over the past years. It's targeting our children. They're holding summer camps. They're opening clubs in school, clubs known as the Club of the Church of Satan. And they're attacking the generation that is growing up. The generation that will probably go out and try to murder our Christian kids. So, again, this isn't prophecy. This isn't Holy Spirit inspired. This letter sounds like a Illuminati outline to bring about their Luciferian plans and bring it out into public view. It says at the end, the final sentence, that the manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism. Interesting. Atheism is not Luciferian. Okay. Luciferian is actually against atheism, because Luciferian is worshiping Lucifer. And both, the goal is that both will be conquered and exterminated at the same time. So here's the end goal. If this letter is not a hoax and it is a no kidding Illuminati outline to carry out their plan is to bring about a complete social cataclysm to the world, which will then bring an end to Christianity and atheism and reveal Lucifer and his plan to the world as the new leading authority and the new government. Now, though this isn't prophecy, it matches a lot with what we're reading in Revelation. So, I asked you guys, like, what do you think this next major war would look like? Is it going to look like, how it's outlined here in this Albert Pike letter from 1871? Well, looking at the world today, it's definitely very possible. Especially if that letter is true, seeing how World War I and World War II played out to the T according to the letter. If we see World War III play out how the letter says, then yeah, there may be something there. Maybe the Illuminati does exist and is kind of running the show. So, and this next war, you all were in agreement that there's another war coming. I think everybody kind of feels it. Hollywood feels it. You see the movies coming out. I guess the big question is, what's going to be the cause? What's going to be the spark that sets it off? I think everybody kind of feels there's another world war coming. Maybe soon. I hope not. But eventually, it's inevitable. But then we kind of brought it home to America, right? Because this is where we live. How are things going to be in our country? How would this World War III, between Zionism and Islam, or even if it's another scenario that causes World War III, how would it affect us? And what can we do to survive it? So we talked about that. We referenced scripture, right? How when John in his vision saw the second seal open, he saw a rider on a red horse. And that rider was given a mighty sword and the authority to take peace from the earth. And he saw war and slaughter everywhere. Could this be reference to the social cataclysm that's coming, where there's just going to be war and slaughter everywhere? Jesus warned us, Matthew 24, right? That there will be rumors of wars and wars. Nation will go against nation and kingdom will go against kingdom. But this isn't the end. I want you to notice here, I guess I didn't mention it today, but notice this isn't the tribulation yet. So, the Antichrist hasn't even shown up here. This is just kind of an end to the world as we know it. I think of it more of as a transition into a world where the Luciferian plan is revealed and the Antichrist is revealed, probably by the Illuminati, to kind of rule the recovered war. You know, kind of like the world as we know it today will end for a new world to form, a world led by Lucifer and the Antichrist. And that'll bring about the great tribulation that we talk about. So, you know, if rapture is before the tribulation, doesn't necessarily mean it's before the horsemen and this social cataclysm. So there's a very good chance that even if we're hoping in a rapture, that we still got to go through this World War III. I mean, the people that lived in World War II probably thought they would get raptured when they saw Hitler coming into power and Nazism spreading against, across Europe. They probably thought this is it, and they waited, and they did not get raptured, and they had to live and fight through World War II. They probably thought the same thing in World War One. So, the rapture is a hope that we have as a church. We put our hope in it. But it doesn't necessarily mean we're immune from World War III or the warning that Jesus gave us about nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom. He even said these are the beginning of birth pains, but the end is yet to come. So, it is good to hope in the rapture, but I think we also need to prepare for the stuff that is coming before that. Like a possible major world war coming here soon, even. All right, we referenced the Ezekiel 38 prophecy, which we talked about in the lesson. Could that be World War III? Maybe, not necessarily. It could be part of World War III. It could be World War III. Or it could be a war that still happens after World War III. I don't know. What's interesting about the prophecy, though, is the players, right? So you got Gog's alliance, which is seems like a communism Muslim alliance, right? Because you got Gog up in the north, Russia. You got Persia, which is Iran, which talked about in the lesson, how these modern nations translate today. Ethiopia, Libya, all Muslim nations. Eastern Europe. That's the interesting one, because that's the kind of the variable right now. Today, you could see an alliance between Russia, Iran, Ethiopia, even Libya, even Turkey, a NATO country, is every day goes more and more towards the Russia-Iran alliance. We're seeing this happen today. Eastern Europe, though, that's an interesting one because we still got, the war between Russia and Ukraine going on. So it doesn't seem like Eastern Europe is kind of with Russia, but it's interesting with this prophecy because shows like they will be part of Gog's alliance. Good thing we sent all that gear and money over there to Ukraine, huh? They might turn against us one day. Who knows? We'll see. And then on the other side in this prophecy, you got Israel's alliance, right? Israel, of course, their greatest alliance is God. They don't need an alliance. However, you got kind of what, looks like a democracy Zionism alliance kind of forming with Western Europe, the emergence of Tarshish and all that, Sudan or Dedan and Saudi Arabia. No direct mention or anything like alluring to America in prophecy, Old Testament or New Testament. America just doesn't seem to be a part of any of it. Like there's no real prophecy where you can directly be like, there we are, there's America. America's just not really in the prophetic map. I don't know what that means. That means we won't even be around during the end times. Will America fall before then? Maybe. Or maybe it's because we're so far off in the West that, the prophecy is kind of centered on Middle East. That could be it. I hope so. I hope it's not the other one where America's not around, but I don't know. We got to be prepared for both, I guess. And then someone mentioned nuclear war, right? Oh, we get nuked. We talked about that. Could nuclear war even happen? Definitely a possibility, right? And what can we do to survive that? We didn't get too much into the survival about it because, and, if you're in the blast, there ain't no surviving it. And even if you're in the area afterwards with the fallout, very difficult to survive. It will require, gear, right? Mask and stuff, but then you gotta deal with the radiation. So kind of hard to survive a nuclear, war. And I think, even I mean, if there is an Illuminati and agents of the Illuminati kind of bringing about, do they want a nuclear war? I don't know. I mean, that would affect them as well, but not far from the possibility, maybe at a minor scale. Um, there is that reference in prophecy. Some think that maybe it's a reference to nuclear war, but not necessarily. It's in Ezekiel 39 where it says, God says, I will rain down fire on Magog and all of your allies who live safely on the coast. Not necessarily. I mean, there's some fire coming down from the heavens. Doesn't necessarily mean it's nuclear weapons. It could be, or it could just be like how he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah and just rain down fire and burning sulfur from heaven. But it's something to think about. So I showed you guys some research I did on it of what if, I hope not, but what if, we do get, there is some kind of a nuclear attack. Here's the 15 top cities that are most at risk. Me personally, the top two I think are, before I even researched this, I stopped and just thought, if somebody were to shoot a nuclear weapon at us, where would it go? And the first thing I came up with was Washington, D.C., obviously, our capital, and maybe New York City because the UN, the United Nations headquarters is there. And sure enough, I did the search, and those are the top two that came up on the list. So there you go. I mean, I don't know how accurate this map could be, but something to consider if you're looking at moving. You don't want to be close to these cities if they are potential targets. You definitely don't want to be near Washington, D.C. or New York City, in my opinion. But it's not just the blast, right? We talked about the fallout. So this is cool, kind of research, what the radius of a fallout is, and put those rings around Washington, D.C. and also New York City to see, in this one, Washington, D.C. fallout, the red dot is where D.C. is on the map, and the fallout is predicted to be that blue ring around it. So you see it, just because you're not in the blast, you're still affected. Pretty good radius there. With the radiation fallout. And then this doesn't even take into account wind patterns. Now, luckily, in America, the wind blows west to east. So, if there's a East Coast nuclear explosion, the wind will actually help us, we who live west of the Appalachian Mountains, because the radiation will be blown over the Atlantic. But, recently, even weather patterns are getting weird. There's been reversals of weather patterns. There's been hurricanes going the opposite direction here within the past 2 years. There's been manipulation of weather. There's science trying to manipulate weather and manipulate wind patterns and manipulate even making storms. I don't know why we are even thinking that's okay, but who knows, right? Everything's possible, but weather and wind does play into. So think about that when you're thinking about fallout. Weather and wind does play into it. There's the ring for New York City fallout, basically covering the whole northeast New England area. So I hope not, right? I hope there's not any kind of nuclear war, but definitely something that need to be considered, as far as where to move. And I don't know, maybe buying some radiation gear isn't a bad idea. Okay, so we kept talking about America, right? I mean, we kind of went from big prophecy to our own nation because that this is our land, this is our home, and when you talk about wars over there, it's one thing. It's you could talk about it, but when it's in our front lawn, that's a different story. Okay, that's gonna really bring it home, and just kind of try to put into your mind today, America is not invincible. We think we are, but we're not. So we need to start thinking, what if a war comes within our border? Um, what if it comes from within? So these are all things that you need to think about and definitely prep about, What if the social collapse, the social calamity that Albert Pike talked about happens here in our own land? How would that look like? Would it be like that movie, The Book of Eli, where after a nuclear explosion, 30 years later, there was a complete social collapse and anarchy in the US? And, my favorite actor, I told you guys, Denzel Washington. He's this character, Eli, that's holding a very special book. I don't want to say what the book is because if you haven't seen the movie, it'll spoil it. But he's walking about across this apocalyptic America, and it has some interesting visuals there on what that would look like. Is that the future of America? Quite possible, maybe. Talked about this new movie that has come out on Netflix. I know you guys are not on Netflix, and that is a good thing. You probably don't need to be on there. But this movie has kind of caused some waves here recently. It's called Leave the World Behind, and it talks about, pretty much the beginning of a social collapse here in America. It's modern time. It's a brand new movie produced by the Obamas. That's interesting. Or co-produced, executive produced, something like that. And basically the gist of the movie is cell phones go down, power grids go down, satellites go down. Basically, there's a cyber attack on America from an unknown enemy outside, or no one knows in the movie who attacked. Nobody knows what's going on. Just all the comforts we have, like this, right? Like our GPS, like our lights, computer that I'm talking through, YouTube, all that is just gone in an instant with a cyber attack hack. Imagine that. Imagine if tomorrow our cell phones go down, our powers all go out. If we lose GPS, do you know how to navigate with a map? Communication, you can't call family if you're not home. You don't know where your family's about. Scary things to think about that. Talk about, what if America gets invaded? We don't even need to get invaded, right? You just gotta get hacked and take out something as simple as this will cause major mayhem in America. Okay, there's the things we, and it could be, this is not an all-inclusive list, right? But I just sat down and thought, or I've been thinking, like, what if we have an electrical grid blackout? What am I going to do? What am I going to do with my family, right? How are we going to prepare for that? I need to store some flashlights or something, right? I got to have maybe a generator. I got to get prepped for that. What if our cell phone grid breaks down? How am I going to link up with family if I can't call them and I'm out of town? If I lose GPSs, do I have an atlas to navigate home if I'm out of state? Loss of internet, I think could survive without that. But I don't know, there's a lot of things. Who knows? We won't know how dependent we are on these things until we actually lose it. The one that scares me is the food shortage. Me and the Marine Corps have been in countries where people go hungry, and when there's a food shortage, people get very desperate, and it can get scary. There's a food shortage in America, and people are seeing their kids go hungry, seeing their spouse go hungry, their elderly going hungry. People will get desperate, and there's no telling what people are going to do, right? To get food for their family. What if the government succeeds in taking our firearms? I've often thought about this for the last few years, right? Do you think the criminals are going to follow the gun ban laws? No. Only good citizens will, right? Then we won't have weapons, but the criminals will then all have weapons. What would that do to our society, to our home raids and all that? Or how about economically? What if the bank system collapses? How can we do economy without a bank? You guys mentioned what if money doesn't even become a thing anymore? Not like a dollar completely worthless. So we're gonna have a trade system, a barter system. What supplies should we have to be able to trade? What's gonna become valuable that isn't valuable now, and what is valuable now that won't be anything, you know? Um, what if the banks collapse? What are we going to go to? A cryptocurrency? That's a new thing on the rise right now. And this bank collapse, this is not something far fetched. I mean, our bank collapse and economy collapse, we're at the brink of that. So what's going to happen? We're going to go to cryptocurrency. What's that going to do? Are we going to do a social credit system like China has, where your behavior affects how much credit you have? Is the government going to hunker down as society starts to collapse and try to get more control? I saw this thing out there I told you about, this 15-minute town theory where you create these small pockets of towns. It's called 15-minute because everything you need is supposedly within a 15-minute walk. And instead of, these, big cities and all, it's just going to be these little towns spread out throughout America. What would those towns be like? A lot of control there. Talked about that movie, The Giver, or I think you read the book, The Giver, one of you guys, and how scary that is, in that movie, or that book, they keep the little town in control. They don't tell them about what's outside. They have them take injections every day, vaccinations. Talk a little about that, just for emotional control and stuff like that. They're not told history. They're not told what's going on in the world around them, right? We talked about a lot of movies, talking about a lot of movies today, right? And I know they're all movies, but it's kind of interesting. All these movies coming out now are kind of like have the same theme. It's almost like, people feel it, right? Like Hunger Games or, the Divergent series. That's a pretty interesting series to watch too. So, guys, I don't know. I don't know what's coming, but you got to start kind of think about this stuff because this isn't necessarily great tribulation in Bible prophecy, right? This is just social collapse of different nations, which seems to be predicted by the first four seals and the four horsemen, kind of paving the way for the arriving of the Antichrist. We also talked about the possibility of what if America ever split again? Not necessarily north-south or east-west or maybe different pockets, not necessarily two, maybe, 3 or 4. Told you how there's an interesting movie that's coming out in April here in a couple months. I'm going to post the link to the preview so you guys can watch it. Seems like a good movie, but it's about a civil war in America. And it's interesting how this movie's coming out, especially on an election year. I'm kind of eager to watch it. The trailer is very interesting, and it basically talks about what we talked about today. Different America getting fractured into different factions and kind of a civil war happening in our own land, which is interesting. If in the Constitution, I also learned that if there's a war within the border, the election is allowed to be postponed till the war is resolved. So hope not. Hope that doesn't happen this year. So I don't know, a lot of interesting things to ponder. We talk about what if China invades the U.S.? What if they invade the West Coast, invade California? Not too far from possibility. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen then if the war comes into our borders, right? What if there's terrorist cells in our land waiting to execute jihad? This is probably even the most possible because, especially with the conflict going on in the Middle East and how America's supporting Israel, with our border being open the last 4 years or so, it ain't just people from Central and South America coming through that border. I mean, you got people from all over the world, to include the Middle East, coming through our southern border and just going into all over our own nation. I don't know. There could be secret terrorist cells amongst our cities, just waiting for an execute call. What if that happens and you have terrorist cells start waking up all over our nation? What's going to happen then? So, sorry, I know you probably left class today a little scared, a little nervous, but it's okay. I think it's a healthy fear that we need to have. Again, Jesus warned us about this, right? There will be wars, kingdom against kingdom, nation against nation. This is just the first of the birth pains. This is just birth pains. The end is still yet to come. So, good possibility that we will live through some of this stuff. All right. So, here's something I thought about after. And I didn't get to ask you guys this, but do you think the red horseman or blacksmith, red and white, will they work together when they show up, right? So we talked about with the last lesson, the white horseman, kind of this peaceful acquiescence, this conquering. He set out to conquer, but it didn't seem like a violent one. Maybe it's more of an ideological conquering. But then this second seal, this red horse guy, I mean, it's clearly a violent, war and slaughter everywhere, peace taken from the earth. So it seems like these horsemen are complete opposites here, but could be working together, right? Could the white be setting up the stage for this complete World War III / social cataclysm brought about by the red horse? And what are the third and the fourth horse going to bring after war is everywhere? That's to come in the next lesson. So stay tuned to that. And another thing interesting in the Ezekiel 39 prophecy is somehow warfare goes back to shields, bows, javelin, and spears. What can cause that? So I told you I was going to tell you about EMP, but we ran out of time. So before I conclude here real quick, an EMP is an electromagnetic pulse. So basically, it's kind of like a bomb, but not an explosion, right? It just it's like an electrical bomb that just basically disrupts all communication. It damages electronic equipment, so stuff like, computers, electrical networks, power grids, communication, stuff like that. So there's always that's out there, EMPs, and what can survive that. EMPs go off, there goes all our cars, all our technology. We basically go back a few, 100 years with EMP blasting your city. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, I'm going to send you guys out more information here soon via email about the team survival project that we're going to do this semester. Okay, so this is consider this kind of like a warning order that's coming. Basically, the overview of this project that you guys are going to have to do as a team this semester is develop a plan to prepare for these possible scenarios that we talked about today. Okay, why? To endure them and continue to spread the gospel in accordance with the Great Commission. When the world starts collapsing and pandemonium starts going everywhere, the gospel still needs to be preached. Probably then more than ever. Okay, and you need people to endure this collapse in order to continue spreading the gospel. As Jesus said, we will spread it till the end of the age, until his return. So, practically, I think it's right to prepare for a social collapse, prepare for these scenarios so that you are then able to help others and spread the gospel of Christ throughout the chaos, because people can still be saved. All right, so more information to come via email on this project. Still kind of working out the details, but plan it'll be over the semester here, and we're gonna come up with a prep plan, with a survival plan. I'm excited to hear what you guys come up with. All right, next lesson we're gonna cover both the third and the fourth seal, and start talking about the rise of that character known as the Antichrist. You're going to see how the first four seals, the four horsemen, really set up the stage for his arrival and for the Great Tribulation. Until then, keep praying, start prepping, and I'll see you. God bless.